Chapter 5. The sun hadn't fully risen when Davin found himself at the helm of the hauler mecha, its cockpit wrapped around him like a protective shell. The steel giant lumbered over the uneven terrain beyond the borders of Ironspire, its bulky frame swaying with every cautious step. The clinking of debris and the low hum of the machine was comforting in its own way, a rhythm Davin had known all his life. It felt good to be working again, even if it wasn't the glamorous piloting he'd once imagined. But as the sun began to cast long shadows across the desolate landscape, Davin reminded himself that this was just the beginning. He'd proven his worth back on Tessara Prime, and he'd do it again here, no matter how small the steps. "Looking steady enough?" Jonas's gruff voice came through the comm. "We're heading into a derelict mining site. Used to belong to one of the minor cores that ran out of here, and they ran dry. Still, a lot of scrap we're salvaging, though." Davin adjusted the mecha's legs to steady its pace. His hands were beginning to relax on the controls as the rhythm of the machine became second nature. "What kind of scrap are we looking for?" "Mostly alloy panels, old processing units. Anything that still holds a value. Keep an eye out for anything that looks like it could be worth more than just parts. Some of the tech these places left behind is more useful than they realized." Gavin nodded, even though Jonas couldn't see him. "Got it. I'll keep an eye on the scanner." For the next few hours, Davin worked steadily, maneuvering the hauler through the wreckage of the abandoned site. The large claws of the mecha were designed for heavy lifting, and with a practiced hand, Davin used them to sift through debris, setting aside anything that might be worth hauling back. But as the day dragged on, a creeping frustration began to settle in. The terrain was rougher than it looked, and the hauler systems were older, meaning every few minutes Davin had to recalibrate the balance or adjust the thrusters to keep the load steady. His hands ached and his back felt stiff from the constant shifts in motion. This was hard, repetitive labor, not the thrilling, high-octane piloting he had dreamt of. "Slowing down already, kid?" Jonas's voice cut through his thoughts. "You're moving like this is your first haul." Davin grimaced and straightened up in the cockpit. "Just getting a feel for the rig. It's been a while since I've worked on one this old." "Old doesn't mean useless," Jonas shot back. "It's the pilot that makes it work. Remember that. Keep at it. You'll get used to the rhythm." Despite the gruff tone, there was a hint of wisdom in Jonas's words. The man had likely spent his whole life working with machines like this, and he knew the grind better than anyone. Davin clenched his jaw and pushed forward, determined to prove he wasn't just some kid from the backwater colonies. The hours passed in a blur of sweat and concentration. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, Davin had managed to clear most of the marked area, the cargo bins attached to the hauler's back now filled with salvageable scrap. He guided the mecha back to the rendezvous point where Jonas was waiting with his own rig, already half-loaded. Jonas gave him a curt nod. "Not bad for your first day. You didn't break the damn things, that's a start." Davin smirked, trying to ignore the exhaustion creeping up his spine. "Thanks. What now?" "We head back, unload, see what's worth keeping. You did fine today, kid. You'll be sore as hell tomorrow, but if you can get through it, you've earned another day." Davin grinned at that. He knew it was as close to a compliment as Jonas would give. Back at their apartment, Davin collapsed into the worn-out couch, groaning as his muscles finally gave way to the strain of the day. Lyra was sitting at the small dining table, her hands deep in a disassembled motor part, but she glanced up when she heard him flop down. "You look like you got hit by a freighter," she teased. "Feels like it too," Davin muttered, rubbing his shoulders. "Jonas wasn't kidding when he said it'd be hard work." Lyra smirked, but kept her eyes on her work. "But you got through it, right?" "Yeah," Davin sighed. "It's just not exactly what I thought I'd be doing. I mean, it's familiar and all, but I didn't leave home to do the same thing I was doing back there." Lyra paused and looked up, her expression softening. "Look, I get it. You came here wanting to be a combat pilot, thinking you'd be in the arenas or flying missions for the RIS by now. But you gotta start somewhere. And besides," she added with a grin, "you've always been good at this kind of work. You'll find your way to the big stuff eventually." Davin let out a long breath. "Yeah, maybe. It's just hard to see the path forward, and all I'm doing is moving junk." "Well, junk or not, you've got a gig," Lyra said, standing up and walking over to the couch. her work still in hand. She sat beside him. "That's more than most people who just arrived here can say. You gotta be patient. The big stuff will come, but for now you gotta make sure your name's known. Prove yourself, and when the right opportunity comes, you'll be ready." Davin nodded, knowing she was right. Patience had never been his strong suit, but Lyra had always been the voice of reason between them. She knew how to play the long game, and Davin was starting to realize that in Ironspire, patience and persistence were as valuable as skill. "Besides," Lyra added with mischievous grin, "you should be thankful you're not stuck in a workshop all day. I've got a busted plasma actuator that's been kicking my ass for 3 hours. Davin laughed, the tension in his shoulders finally loosening. "I'd rather be hauling scrap any day than doing that." "Exactly. Now eat something and get some rest. You've got more hauling to do tomorrow." Davin returned to the worksite, the early morning light casting long shadows over the abandoned mining area. His muscles still ached from the previous day, but there was something strangely satisfying about the work. The hum of the hauler's engine, the clank of scrap being loaded into the cargo bins, it was a rhythm, and Davin was beginning to settle into it. Jonas, as usual, was already there, supervising the operation with his usual gruff demeanor. "Thought you'd be limping by now," he said, eyeing Davin as he climbed into the cockpit. "I'm tougher than I look," Davin replied, suppressing a wince as he settled into the seat. "Good. Tough is what you need to survive here." Davin powered up the hauler, feeling a little more confident with the controls now. The terrain was still rough, but he was getting the hang of the machine's quirks, the way it shifted its weight, the way it responded to even the smallest adjustment to the thrusters. Jonas was right. It was about getting into a rhythm. As the day progressed, Davin found himself lost in the routine of the work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and as the cargo hold filled with scrap, he couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. He was earning his keep, making a name for himself, even if it was just in the small world of industrial salvage. But as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting the mining site in a deep red glow, something shifted in the air. Davin felt it before he saw it. An unease, a tension that hadn't been there before. The comm in his cockpit crackled to life. "Davin," Jonas's voice came through, low and tense. "Hold position. I'm getting something on the scanner." Davin's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "Not sure yet. Could be nothing, but..." Jonas trailed off, his voice hardening. "Just stay sharp." Davin scanned the terrain ahead, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the flickering display. The scanner showed movement, faint but distinct about half a kilometer away. He couldn't make out what it was, but it was closing in fast. "Jonas," Davin's voice tightened, "you seeing this?" "Yeah, I'm seeing it. Stay close to the rig. We're pulling out." Before Davin could respond, the movement on the scanner accelerated. The blip became 2, then 3, and suddenly the ground seemed to tremble beneath the hauler's feet. Something was coming, and it wasn't friendly.